Not there, the draft is on his neck, Genevieve said, drawing the smallest boy behind his brothers before she looked toward the altar. Quentin, Duke of Edgemont, turned from the rector and saw 3 boys beneath the gallery, 3 variations of the face he had carried since boyhood. He shut the prayer book. I will not speak another marriage vow while the mother of those boys stands unheard. Behind him, veiled Ursula stood stunned as whispers rose. Genevieve did not move. The youngest pressed against her skirt. She kept one hand at his neck. The Duke's aunt had ordered rooms for 2 boys at the main house. Only 2. That was why she had come. Quentin stepped down from the altar. Genevieve raised her chin before he could cross the aisle. Will all 3 remain at North Lodge today? He looked from her to the boys, then to the high window above them. Yes, no one moves any of them without your leave. The youngest shivered. Which of them needs a cloak? Quentin asked. Genevieve had expected demands and explanations. Instead, he had noticed the cold. The little one. Quentin turned to his groomsmen. 3 cloaks to the vestibule, if you please. Then to the rector, the ceremony is suspended. The rector stared at Genevieve as though a door in his memory had opened. Mrs. Ashby. Genevieve looked at him. He swallowed. Your Grace, I entered the marriage myself before you went abroad. If this is the same, lady, and if no dissolution was ever granted, no second marriage can lawfully proceed. Ursula's face had gone white, but she did not weep or reach for him. She lowered her gloved hand and stepped back from the rail. The Duke's aunt came forward at once. Quentin, this cannot be allowed. Send the woman and the children away. The whispers changed. Heads turned toward Genevieve with a different hunger. She adjusted the middle boy's collar. Being a lawful wife does not answer my question. Quentin's gaze returned to her. Where will my sons sleep tonight? She asked. Together or not, together, he said. At North Lodge, if that is where you want them. Genevieve did not cross the aisle or take the place beside him that society had just declared hers. She gathered the boys toward the side door. Quentin remained where he was long enough to speak quietly to Ursula. Genevieve heard only the beginning, an apology, not an excuse. Ursula answered with equal restraint. Then Quentin followed the boys out, keeping several paces behind them. They went directly to North Lodge before the wedding guests could turn astonishment into a procession. Quentin rode beside the carriage, but did not try to speak through the window. Genevieve had 3 cold boys, 1 loose casement, and a nursery arrangement to prevent before dusk. The lost years could wait. At the lodge she went first to the small upstairs room. The youngest bed had been placed beneath the rattling window. No, she said. She set down her gloves, caught the bedstead with both hands, and dragged it across the floorboards. The eldest took the footboard without being asked. The middle boy moved a stool out of the way. By the time Quentin reached the doorway, the 3 bedsteads stood where Genevieve had drawn them on a folded sheet of paper, close enough for the boys to hear one another at night, the youngest farthest from the draught. She laid the paper on the table and flattened its creases. I need them here, she said. All 3. Your aunt means to separate them. Quentin looked at the drawing before he looked at her. For 3 months, North Lodge is yours without interference. No servant or relation enters unless you permit it. I shall arrange the household money through the provision in our settlement, and you will decide the boys' daily routine. And if I do not return to the main house, North Lodge remains. If I do not resume life as your wife, the boys still remain with you. If you disagree with how I order their day, I ask, I do not remove them. Write it, she said. I will. The next morning, the rector and the Edgemont solicitor confirmed what the chapel register already suggested. Genevieve's marriage to Quentin had never been dissolved. Ursula Foxcroft's ceremony had stopped before vows were exchanged. There was no second marriage to undo. The solicitor also produced the old settlement, A provision made before Quentin went abroad placed certain household funds for Genevieve's separate use through trustees. Quentin ordered that North Lodge be supplied from that provision and added his own written undertaking that the boys would not be moved from her care merely because she refused the Duchess's apartments. Genevieve read every line. "I have written to Lord Foxcroft as well," Quentin said. "Edgemont will meet every expense caused by the abandoned ceremony. Any letter sent from this house concerning it will make plain that Lady Ursula bore no fault. The impediment was mine." Genevieve looked up. Ursula had lost a wedding through no dishonor of her own. "Good," she said. Quentin had repaired the harm to Ursula before Genevieve thought to ask it of him. He made no performance of generosity. He simply put the burden where it belonged. Genevieve stored that fact with the others she was beginning to trust. Later that day, Genevieve was in the library reviewing the settlement when the Duke's aunt Isabella Gresham objected with predictable force. "She should be installed in the Duchess's suite at once. Whatever else has happened, appearances still exist." Quentin stood by the fire, tired enough that the shadows beneath his eyes showed. "So does her choice. She is your wife. That does not make the west staircase a chain." Genevieve did not rely on the defense. She rewrote Quentin's undertaking herself. She set the hours in which he might come to North Lodge, kept final say over meals, sleep, the nurse's hours, and the boys' movements, and gave him 2 mornings each week that were his to manage as their father. North Lodge remained hers even if she never chose the main house. When she put the revised page before him, Quentin read it without complaint. "You have changed nearly every line," he said. "Most of them were imprecise." A corner of his mouth moved. "I had forgotten that imprecision offends you personally. It harms people impersonally. That is worse." He signed. No servant would arrive at dusk to carry 2 boys away. Yet fatherhood and marriage still gave Quentin no automatic place in the family life she had built without him. On the second morning, an Edgemont footman brought a basket from the main kitchens. His face stayed blank, but his eyes went from Genevieve to the 3 small coats, then to the nursery door. "Your Grace, the cook sent broth and bread." "Leave them in the passage," she said. "And tell the servants' hall that North Lodge has no gallery for spectators." His ears reddened. Quentin heard enough as he came up the path. He did not call the man back. The next day's provisions arrived without another invented errand to the nursery. A pale Yorkshire rain settled over the estate before the week was out, tapping the nursery panes and turning the garden paths dark. The first week gave Genevieve more useful information than any apology could have done. Quentin came to North Lodge in the mornings. He did not begin with the eldest, because the eldest would one day inherit. He learned instead which child hated the skin on porridge, which woke after thunder, and which hid a torn stocking because he could not bear a fuss made over him. On Tuesday, Genevieve found Quentin kneeling on the nursery floor before the middle boy who had tucked one ankle beneath himself. "I tore mine on a rose bush when I was 8, Quentin said, nodding toward the concealed stocking. "My aunt made me stand in the hall for an hour. Shall we find a needle before anyone turns this into a ceremony?" The boy considered him, then produced the torn heel. Genevieve paused with clean linen in her arms. She kept the household steady by thinking 3 steps ahead. Breakfast before arithmetic, soured garden before the youngest grew restless, fire before damp reached his chest. Quentin worked differently. He attended to the child before him and asked one question at a time. She distrusted the difference at first. When thunder woke the youngest from an afternoon sleep, Genevieve began measuring out warm, milk-dry stockings and an earlier supper. Quentin simply sat on the rug beside the boy until he leaned against his shoulder and stopped crying. Genevieve looked at the clock. "Have I ruined the schedule?" Quentin asked. "Not yet." "How much time remains before ruin?" 14 minutes. She ought not to have been amused. She was. The same difference appeared at breakfast. The eldest scraped the skin from his porridge and tried to hide it beneath his spoon. The middle boy wanted more milk. The youngest dropped his spoon and immediately reached for his brother's. Genevieve dealt with all three without raising her voice. She shifted one bowl, poured milk with her left hand, caught the stolen spoon with her right and said, "Your own spoon is on the floor. Civilization requires retrieval." Quentin looked down to hide a laugh. Later, he spent several minutes comparing 3 pairs of nearly identical boots rather than asking a footman to sort them. "The buckle on that pair is scratched," Genevieve said from the doorway. "The eldest, the middle," Quentin sighed. "I begin to suspect the boots are conspiring against me. The boots are innocent, your memory is not." He looked up at her. Cruel Mrs. Ashby. She should have corrected the form of address. Instead, warmth caught her off guard. Any man could kneel when someone watched. Quentin returned the next morning and remembered the scratched buckle. He cooled the middle boy's tea before it was asked. He took the youngest's hand on the stairs without lifting him like a parcel. He listened when the eldest said he wanted to finish a page alone. I was learning them as 3 people. By the 3rd week, North Lodge sounded less like a refuge and more like a home. They reopened the old schoolroom where a tall window lit the boys' lessons. Genevieve moved supper forward because the youngest had twice fallen asleep at table. Quentin repaired the loose catch on the garden gate with the estate carpenter rather than simply ordering a new one. The boys began leaving one chair for him without discussion. None of it looked like courtship. That was precisely why Genevieve began to trust it. A rainy Thursday brought the first breach in their careful dignity. The boys had been indoors since breakfast and had reached the dangerous stage at which every respectable object suggested a new use. Quentin proposed a reading hour. 10 minutes later, the parlor armchairs had been stripped of cushions and a fortress occupied half the rug. Genevieve entered carrying a basket of mending and saw 3 pairs of muddy boots where no muddy boot had permission to be. "Stop," she said. 3 heads appeared above the cushions. "You will take the boots to the porch, then the cushions." A muffled sound came from beneath the mahogany table. Genevieve bent slightly. Quentin was wedged beneath it on one elbow, reaching for a fallen book of Greek tales. The youngest sat across his calves, as though the Duke of Edgemont were a captured bridge. "Would you object?" Quentin said with grave courtesy, "to postponing the cushions until I regain the use of my legs." The youngest clasped both arms around his ankles. Genevieve pressed her lips together. She failed. Laughter escaped her so suddenly that the middle boy stared. Quentin went still beneath the table, then laughed too. She allowed the fortress 5 more minutes. 5, Quentin repeated. 4 now. Your generosity is legendary. The boots, she reminded him. The boys groaned and obeyed. That evening after baths, stories and 3 separate arguments about blankets' quiet finally settled over the lodge. Genevieve and Quentin sat on opposite sides of the small desk. The folded drawing of the 3 beds lay between them now, crowded with notes about winter blankets, the chimney sweep, and a cracked pane in the schoolroom. Genevieve reached for the line about the chimney. Quentin reached at the same moment. His fingers came down lightly over 2 of hers. Neither moved. Genevieve could hear the casement ticking in its frame and the faint crackle of the fire. Quentin's hand was warm. The contact was slight, yet her pulse stumbled once hard enough to annoy her. He lifted his hand first. "Tomorrow for the chimney sweep," he asked. "After lessons." "Of course." There was no declaration, no demand. He simply returned to the page. Later, when Genevieve made her last circuit of the house, she checked the nursery latch, the fire guard, and the water jug. At the boys' door, she stopped with her hand on the knob. For weeks, she had wanted Quentin because he was useful to the children. That was safe territory. Useful men could be assigned hours. But tonight, she wanted 10 minutes with him after every lamp in the nursery had gone dark. The want had nothing to do with fatherhood. That made it far more difficult to put on a list. By the 5th week, Genevieve had begun to discover the less flattering side of competence. She delegated, then checked. The nurse laid out clean shirts. Genevieve counted them again. Quentin packed a walking bag. She reopened it. The footman tested the nursery casement. She tested it after midnight. Nothing was actually wrong. That was the difficulty. Quentin found her one morning moving a spoon on a tray the cook had already arranged. "I want tomorrow morning," he said. "Breakfast, dressing lessons, and the garden. Until noon. Mine." The middle boy's tea must be cooled. The eldest avoids Latin if no one remains in the room. The youngest cannot find his left glove even when it is on his left hand. Write it down. There are more than 3 things. I assumed as much. He was smiling, but not making light of her. Genevieve wrote 1 page, then crossed out half of a second because she knew what he was asking her to do. At the bottom she added, "The blue waistcoat belongs to the eldest." The next morning she remained upstairs. At 8 she heard chairs scrape below and nearly went down because breakfast had begun 4 minutes late. Half an hour later came a crash, then all 3 boys laughing. "No blood," Quentin's voice floated up the stairs. "Excellent. Then perhaps we need not summon Parliament." Genevieve took her hand from the door latch. At 11 the house fell quiet, which proved worse than noise. At noon precisely, she went downstairs. The boys sat before the parlor fire, fed warm and occupied. The middle boy had ink on one thumb. Quentin met Genevieve in the hall. "I put him in the blue waistcoat," he said. "I discovered the crime before the garden. Breakfast was late. He refused arithmetic after the 3rd sum, and I allowed him to stop. The youngest fell on the step, but his knee is sound." Her first answer rose at once. "You should have." Then she saw the middle boy calmly showing his ink-stained drawing to his brother. No one was ashamed. No one was frightened. Nothing had been done exactly as she would have done it. Yet the morning had not required her hand on every hinge. "The blue waistcoat belongs to the eldest," she said. "I shall remember tomorrow." Tomorrow. "You may revoke the privilege." Genevieve heard the invitation to retreat and found she did not want it. "No, tomorrow." Quentin nodded. He did not ask for another hour or another right. He took the trust exactly in the measure given. Several days later, rain caught them while searching the garden for a wooden horse the youngest had left beneath a hedge. Genevieve came back with wet hems and an ache behind her eyes. By evening, the ache had become a fever. A chill ran hard along her back despite the fire, and when she tried to write the night instructions, the pen trembled against the paper. Her first impulse was still to rewrite the night. The nurse had the medicine. Quentin knew the supper hour. Genevieve stared at the wavering ink line beneath her hand. She could not make her fingers steady by force. She dipped the pen once more, then put it down. "Please send for His Grace," she told the nurse. Quentin remained near the door until she motioned him closer. "The nurse will see to the medicine," Genevieve said. "You will take supper and bedtime. It is done. The youngest will ask to come up. I shall tell him you are sleeping." Genevieve closed her eyes. Asking for help with the boys still had a purpose. This next thing did not. "For 1 hour," she said, "I need no one to tell me what the boys require of me." Something in Quentin's face softened. "Then no one will." He moved supper downstairs, kept small feet from climbing to her room, and answered the boys' questions without making their fear another duty for her. Genevieve slept through the supper bell. When she woke the following afternoon, the room was grey with rain-washed light. Quentin sat by the window with a small estate book open on his knee. The boys, in the garden with the nurse. They ate the chicken. The youngest objected to carrots on constitutional grounds. No one is missing a boot. Genevieve let her head sink back against the pillow. No child had appeared in tears because another adult had failed him. The relief frightened her less than she expected. Quentin closed the book. "I have something selfish to say." She turned her head. "I want to sit in this room with you, even when there is not a single child here to give me an excuse. Her heartbeat altered. He did not mention their legal marriage. He did not say the boys needed both parents under one roof. He simply sat there looking more uncertain than he had at the altar. "I have wanted an hour with you without a list between us," Genevieve said. "But I cannot decide what we are while the boys' home depends upon the answer." "It does not. Not today. I mean ever." Quentin leaned forward. "Nothing concerning the boys, their rooms, their care, their access to you, or the money that supports North Lodge shall ever be made the price of an answer from you. If my answer is no, I remain their father. I keep my mornings. You keep your home. And if it is not yet, then I learn patience." Genevieve let her hand rest on top of the quilt. Quentin placed his over it. He did not tighten his fingers or ask for more. Genevieve lay back and allowed herself to rest while he remained in the room. Nothing demanded repayment. The next morning, the eldest lingered over breakfast after his brothers had gone to find their coats. "Mother, did we stop Father's wedding?" Genevieve set down the bread knife. "Who told you that?" "A stable lad said people in the village think we came so you could take the great house." At the other end of the table, Quentin went still. Genevieve looked at her son. "You came because I would not let anyone divide you from your brothers. Nothing about the great house was your doing. Are we going to live there? Not unless we decide it suits us." He absorbed this, then nodded. "Can Father still come to breakfast?" "If he remembers the boots." Quentin looked offended. The eldest grinned and left. By noon, a sealed note from Isabella arrived requesting that Genevieve and Quentin attend her in the main house. Their peace had not broken, but the county's curiosity had reached the nursery door, and Genevieve knew Isabella would use it. 2 senior Edgemont relations were already waiting in the drawing room when they arrived. The shutters stood open to a hard afternoon light. Silver on the mantel shone as if someone had polished it for judgment. "The county speaks of nothing but the chapel," Isabella began. "You have lodged a woman and 3 boys on the estate, and now every dinner table in Yorkshire is guessing how long before she claims the Duchess's place." Genevieve stood with her hands folded while 3 plans formed at once. What could be packed before dark? Which carriage could take the boys south? How many meals could be managed on the road? Isabella continued. "The elder 2 should move into the main house under a proper tutor. The youngest may follow when he is older. Genevieve may remain at North Lodge as a dependent if she behaves with discretion." The old urge returned leave before anyone could divide them. Count shirts, count blankets, count miles. Quentin stepped forward. "I can have rooms prepared in the east wing. A carriage can remain at the lodge. I shall put men at—" He stopped. Genevieve looked at him. He had begun to build a fortress around her without asking whether she wanted one. Quentin took 1 step back. "What do you want done?" The question changed the room. Genevieve let the packing lists fall away one by one. "I want a private family conference in 3 days," she said. "No guests, no gossip. No one will ask the boys whom they love more whether I ought to be Duchess or whether their father has earned forgiveness. They may be asked about their rooms and their daily life. Nothing else." One of the older men shifted in his chair. Isabella gave a short laugh. "You presume to set the terms?" "Yes." Quentin's voice remained quiet. "The boys will not be moved before the conference." Isabella turned sharply toward him. "Ursula was humiliated before the county because of this woman. Do not use me for that purpose." Ursula's voice came from the open doorway. She had returned for effects left after the abandoned ceremony. "What happened at the chapel was painful," she said, pale but composed. "It does not follow that children should be separated for my comfort. I shall take no further part in it." She inclined her head and left. Genevieve was grateful that no second woman would be dragged into the quarrel as a weapon. On the walk back to North Lodge, Quentin did not offer another plan. After several minutes, he said, I nearly arranged your answer before you gave it. You stopped. Barely. Barely still counts. His care was learning not to become command. Her planning was learning not to become flight. 3 days later, they met in the private morning room. There was no audience. Isabella sat with the 2 Edgemont relations. The rector attended because the household still needed one disinterested witness to what was agreed. Quentin stood near the hearth. Genevieve kept the folded bed drawing in her hand. The boys waited with the nurse in the adjoining room. Isabella began at once. The children stand near a dukedom. Affection is not sufficient preparation for their station. Genevieve's influence is excessive, and her appearance at the wedding proves she knows exactly how to use them. Genevieve crossed to the table and unfolded the drawing. "This is not proof of my virtue," she said. "It is where they sleep." No one answered. She touched the first mark. The youngest sleeps farthest from the window because cold air wakes his cough. The middle one settles more quickly if the eldest is near enough to read to him. When they have been separated at night, one wakes then another, and by dawn none of them has slept properly. Isabella lifted her chin. "Children adapt. So do adults. That does not make every arrangement wise." One of the men concealed a cough. Genevieve kept her eyes on Isabella. "I will not accept a title, a suite of rooms, or a restored marriage, because 3 children make the arrangement convenient. I am already their mother. Whether I live with Quentin as his wife is a separate question, and the boys will not be made responsible for the answer." Speaking the sentence felt less like a defense than a decision. "Bring them in, please." The boys entered together. Genevieve crouched so the youngest could see her face. "You are not choosing where I live. You are not choosing anything about father and me. Do you understand?" 3 uncertain nods. "You are only saying what helps you feel settled." The eldest answered first. "I want my brothers in the same wing." The middle boy said, "I want mother to choose the rooms." The youngest studied Quentin. "He can come to breakfast if he stops taking the wrong boots." Quentin closed his eyes for one brief second. One of the older relations smothered a laugh. Even Genevieve nearly smiled. "Thank you," she said to the boys. "That is all." The nurse took them out again. Only then did Genevieve look at Quentin. He came away from the hearth. "As their father, I will not divide them for appearance or convenience," he said. "They remain together. Genevieve retains authority over their daily arrangement at North Lodge, and any change is to be discussed with her first." Isabella drew breath. Quentin continued before she could speak, still without raising his voice. "And you will no longer direct the nursery appoint its servants or order the boys' removal. That responsibility is mine and Genevieve's." For a moment no one moved. Then one of the older men nodded. The second followed more reluctantly. Isabella gathered her gloves. "You will regret allowing sentiment to govern Edgemont." Genevieve folded the drawing. "This is the least sentimental room I have entered all week." Quentin's mouth twitched. Isabella left without another word. The heavy door closed behind her with a hard wooden click. In the sudden quiet, Genevieve heard the fire settle in the grate. Quentin waited until Isabella's footsteps had faded down the passage. "North Lodge remains yours," he said. "The provision remains yours. The boys remain together. None of that changes with what I ask next." Genevieve's heart began to beat faster. He did not approach her. "May I spend the next season courting my own wife?" The absurdity of the wording almost made her smile. "That depends." I feared it might. "Daily access to the family remains, 2 private suppers each week." Agreed. No assumption that a supper earns a bedroom. Agreed. No announcing a reconciliation to the county before I have decided there is one. Quentin's relief was visible now, though he tried to hide it. Agreed. Genevieve folded the bed drawing once more and set it on the table. "And if I change one of those terms, you will tell me." "I generally do." "That is one of your more terrifying virtues." She laughed under her breath. Then she crossed the small space between them herself. Her fingers settled on his lapel. Quentin's gaze dropped to her hand and returned to her face. He remained still until she lifted her chin. The kiss was brief. It held no promise she had not made. When she stepped back, Quentin did not try to take another. 2 suppers, he said softly. Do not become greedy, Your Grace. I shall mark the calendar. 1 full season later, Quentin had learned the blue waistcoat. That fact should not have pleased Genevieve as much as it did. He still served breakfast late on occasion, and once forgot a Latin book entirely. Genevieve no longer followed behind each mistake to repair it. She corrected what mattered and left harmless disorder where it lay. North Lodge remained hers, its key at her waist, and its support untouched by where she slept. The boys moved freely between lodge and main house. Quentin's mornings had become part of their week. The private suppers had multiplied less neatly. That morning a footman stood in the North Lodge passage beside one of Genevieve's trunks. Quentin stopped when he saw it. For once he did not offer an order. Where is that going? Genevieve fastened her glove. The adjoining room at Edgemont. He looked at the trunk, then at her. 1 trunk, she said. Do not look so pleased. I am failing, then. She had chosen the adjoining room, not the Duchess's suite, prepared months before. She wanted a door she could open because she wished to see Quentin, not because law rank or children required it. For now, she added. His smile made her look away first. By noon, the 5 of them were walking along a low ridge above the estate. The early autumn air was sharp, the grass still wet where the sun had not reached it. Quentin carried the youngest on his shoulders. Genevieve had the wool blanket over one arm, and she believed the luncheon accounted for. They found a level patch of grass. Genevieve shook out the blanket and turned. There was no basket. She stared at the empty ground beside her. The basket was on the table at North Lodge. Her mind began its old work. A groom could ride back in 20 minutes. The boys would be hungry before then. The youngest, I have 2 apples, the eldest announced. The middle boy dug into his coat. I have a biscuit. It emerged wrapped in a handkerchief and crushed almost beyond recognition. Quentin lowered the youngest to the grass. Purple stains ringed the child's mouth. And he, Quentin said, has been dining on blackberries for at least 10 minutes. Genevieve looked at the 4 of them. No one was cold. No one was frightened. No one needed to be rescued from the absence of a pie and 3 sandwiches. She looked toward the path as if the basket might appear out of obedience. Then Quentin laughed, the same helpless sound he had made beneath the mahogany table. Genevieve's own laughter came before she could stop it. She sat down. The eldest divided the apples with Quentin's pocket knife. The middle boy guarded his ruined biscuit until the youngest stole half. Genevieve did not calculate fairness to the crumb. After a while, the youngest pulled a folded, much-handled paper from his pocket and found a bit of charcoal. Genevieve recognized the 3-bed drawing. Where did you get that? Your desk. That is not an answer in your favor. He grinned and turned the paper over. On the back, a sheep had acquired 4 uneven legs, 1 enormous ear and a tail in the wrong place. Genevieve reached automatically toward it. Her fingers stopped. The measurements on the other side had mattered. The boys had needed those beds together away from the cold casement, and she had been right to insist upon it. But the paper did not need to remain perfect to prove she had kept them safe. She turned it once more. The 3 bed marks came into view, faded at the folds. For 1 heartbeat, the chapel returned with painful clarity. 3 boys beneath the gallery rooms, prepared elsewhere for only 2 of them, a house full of people ready to decide what a mother and a duchess ought to do. The old fear tightened around her ribs. If she moved farther into Quentin's life, there would always be another drawing room, another opinion, another person who believed rank entitled them to arrange her. Then she heard Quentin telling the middle boy that guarding half a biscuit would not persuade it to become whole again. Genevieve looked at the bedlines. They had kept her sons safe. They were not walls she was required to live behind. She turned the paper so the crooked sheep faced the sky and set a small stone on one corner. "Your sheep is crooked," she told the youngest. "It is walking." "Where?" he considered. "Bath." Quentin choked on his apple and turned sharply away, coughing into his hand while every remnant of ducal dignity deserted him. Genevieve laughed again. The boys soon ran downhill to inspect a pale stone they were certain contained treasure. Quentin remained beside her on the blanket. For a few moments, neither spoke. Genevieve looked once at the paper beneath its stone, the old plan hidden underneath the ridiculous sheep uppermost. Then she reached for Quentin's hand first. He turned his palm beneath hers, careful even now not to make the gesture larger than she intended. "I suppose," he said, looking at the boys, "we have survived lunch. Do not be complacent. Supper remains." "Terrifying." She leaned toward him. This time there was no hearing behind them, no sick room, no rule waiting to be written. Quentin bent only when she lifted her face, and she kissed him beneath the open Yorkshire sky. When they drew apart, the youngest shouted that the stone was merely a stone. Genevieve looked at Quentin, at the apples, at the ruined biscuit, at the wrinkled paper held beneath its small stone. Something had been forgotten. Nothing precious had been lost, and all five of them stayed on the grass until the light began to turn. The end.